right, guys, welcome back to Unit 1, Outcome 2, Key Knowledge 3. And in this video today, we are looking at something called Types of Business Model. So we looked at business structure in the last video. Now we're talking about business model. So make sure that you understand the difference between those two things. So here is our study design as per usual. And this is the one we're looking at, and we can see we have a script. Types of business models such as, and then it lists 6 different types of business model that they want you to understand and know about. So what are we talking about here? What do we mean by business model? Okay, so this term, this phrase business model, it's kind of used to describe or identify like how the business is going to operate. Okay, study design identified those 6 for us, so they're the ones we're going to focus on, that being those 6 there. So we have online business, direct-to-consumer business, bricks-and-mortar business, franchise importer and exporter. Now, looking at that list right off the bat, some of those you probably already get an understanding of what that means. Some of them you might think you understand or have a partial understanding, and 1 or 2 of them maybe not at all. So by the end of this video, you will understand what each of those 6 means. And also we look at the advantages and the disadvantages of operating under each. One thing to point out right off the bat is that when you are choosing or when you're planning to set up your business, you are not limited to just one of these. There are lots of businesses that use multiple. In fact, I would say most businesses probably use multiple of these. It could be anywhere from just one of them to all 6. So most businesses use a range of these business models to run their business. And that will make more sense as we talk through each of them. So start off at the top with the online business model. So I'm pretty sure you already have a bit of a good idea what you think that means. Obviously, there's been a huge increase in online business in recent years. When I was your age, obviously it didn't exist. I couldn't tell you when they started, but certainly in recent years, this is the main area of growth, I guess. But we all understand what we mean by an online business, but our focus here is to look at the 4 different types of subcategory within the online business model category. So the 4 that we look at are the merchant model, the subscription model, the advertising model, and the brokerage model. And right now, you probably don't know what all of those are, but you will in a minute. So first off, the merchant model. Straightforward. This is where the business's own website has the ability to sell direct to customers. So if you went into the website of any of these retailers here, for example, you would obviously be able to order directly online from their website, either to be delivered to you or to pick up in store or whatever. But merchant model just means they sell direct from their website. The next one was the subscription model. So this is where the business charges a fee, usually like a subscription fee, so like a weekly, monthly, whatever it might look like, to use the website. So Netflix would be probably the one that you are very familiar with. So that works under the subscription model, as does the Age newspaper, and a lot of newspapers operate under this kind of model as well. I think like the Age, $4 or $5 a week, something like that, to access the online versions of their newspapers. Advertising model. So this is where customers or users access the website for free because the business obtains advertising revenue. Okay, so this is other businesses paying for space on the website with the aim of attracting customers to their business. So you can obviously, it's free to use Facebook. There's obviously paid versions, but you can access YouTube for free, Twitter or X as it's now known. So these are all sites that you can use for free, but they include paid advertising from other businesses, and that's how they generate their revenue. The brokerage model, the 4th type. So this is where, very simply, the website brings buyers and sellers together. Essentially is an online marketplace. So the brokerage business earns revenue by charging sellers a fee when they make a sale via their website. So eBay and Amazon, you'll be very familiar with. Those are examples of this brokerage model. Okay, so now looking at the advantages and disadvantages of running your business using this kind of a method. So first off, the advantages: your business is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So really good flexibility, really good convenience for your customers. People can shop round the clock any day of the year. Also, a wider customer reach. Anybody can access your website as long as you have an internet connection. So you're not just restricted to the local market. You can sell to anyone, anywhere in the world, as long as you are obviously prepared to post or to send stuff to anywhere in the world. Can also be set up quite quickly, certainly in comparison with some of the other business models we look at. As long as you might need to hire a web designer or a web developer, but it's not too hard to get a website up and running these days. And obviously there's free versions of website builders that people have built some really great websites from as well. So you wouldn't even necessarily need an expert to do that for you. And it can be less expensive because if you're not going to incorporate this with a physical premises, then you avoid the need to be paying either through buying or leasing an actual physical premises as well. So there's some advantages of operating this way. Disadvantages: customers cannot see or touch the products. So you could argue that it's maybe harder for customers to make a purchasing decision. Like, I'm certainly someone that likes to, physically go out and see the products I'm going to buy, particularly if I'm spending some money. What I'll often do then is, go into the store where they are physically present, and then I might go back and try and find somewhere online where I can buy them for cheaper. But I do like to actually, see the products in the flesh, so to speak, before I spend significant amounts of money. Another issue here is online security needs to be managed. That can be quite expensive. Any issues? There's been a lot of issues over the last couple of years with data breaches, that sort of thing, with a lot of very large businesses in Australia. That really impacts the business's reputation if that happens as well. So you've got to be careful with that. It can be harder to develop strong customer relationships because you don't have the physical contact with the customer. And developing and maintaining a website can be expensive. Okay, there's different levels of kind of service you can access, but it can be quite an expensive thing to do. Right, the second type of business model was the direct-to-consumer business. So again, it's important to remember, again, like I said at the beginning, it's not that you use one of these. These are all different types of models, which you probably would use a combination of, okay? So this is just the model where the business, you sell as a business, you sell your products direct to the end customer, the end consumer, not involving any intermediaries or the middleman or whatever you want to call it. So a direct to consumer business, a D2C business, we say that has direct distribution channels. So you're producing your product and you sell directly to the end consumer without involving anybody else, no other chain, no other people involved. So Apple is a good example of this. Whether they sell via their website or whether they sell from the stores, they produce the stuff and they sell direct to consumers. They also do sell via other retailers, which is another type of business model. So there's an example of a business that utilizes lots of different types of business models. But when you're buying from an Apple store or buying from their website, you are purchasing via the D2C model that they operate. Dollar Shave Club, another example. This is actually also a subscription type business. You pay a certain amount per month and they send you razors and other shaving stuff each month to kind of keep you going. Koala mattresses. This is another successful Australian business that has gone into the D2C business. So they produce these mattresses, sell them direct to the consumers rather than selling them to furniture stores who then would sell them to you. So again, another example of the D2C. Harvey Norman. This would be an example of a business that does not operate this model. Okay, think about it. Harvey Norman doesn't produce the stuff they sell. They sell lots of different brands, which they then sell on to you. Okay, so you see the difference, what we're talking about here. Advantages of doing this one. Customer convenience in being able to buy products from one place, direct from the manufacturer. And again, whether that's online or from a physical store, either way, or you have the option of both. The business has direct control over their branding and advertising because there's not another retailer involved in that process as well. Higher profit margins because you're removing an intermediary. Imagine the more intermediaries or more steps that we have in the process from getting the product from manufacture to the end consumer, each of those intermediaries will be taking kind of their cut of profits. So if you're cutting that out, that means the profit comes directly to you as the original producer. And also because you're selling direct to the consumer, particularly if you're operating online and you're collecting customer information, you might have a better connection with an understanding of your customer base because you understand who is directly buying your stuff, rather than if you were selling to an intermediary, then they're the people that might have that information. So there's some advantages of doing this one. Some disadvantages. It can be harder to grow the business quickly without those extra distribution channels. So again, if we come back to some kind of electronic good, for example, if you get it into Good Guys, Harvey Norman, JB Hi-Fi, they've already got the infrastructure there. They've got the stores there. It could be quicker to access the customers. If you're trying to do it yourself from scratch, it's going to take longer to get the word out there and reach those customers. The sales can be slower to pick up if you take this route or this route only. Customer reach can be limited because you're missing out on the promotion that those intermediaries might have also had. So again, if you're selling via those big electronic retailers, they have a huge pulling power, huge marketing power of getting people into their stores. If you're not taking that route, you might be missing out on some customers that just happen to be in those stores, so the promotion that they do as well. Okay, third, bricks and mortar. This, all we mean here is literally a physical store presence that customers can go to. Simple as that. So a physical shop. We actually now, this has kind of developed over the past few years, we now have an additional model, which is not in the study design, I'm just kind of pointing out, clicks and mortar. We had bricks and mortar, now clicks and mortar, which now combines the online with the physical presence. So if you think about it, for most retailers that still operate a physical store, very few of them do not now operate a website, particularly the larger retailers. So most of those businesses now, bricks and mortar, are also clicks and mortar. So just combining online with physical. Now, lots of different options in terms of the actual location, okay? So if you're going to operate a physical premises, you need to obviously think about where that premises is going to be. We don't go into that here because there's a separate key knowledge dot point just on business locations we look at a little bit later in this outcome. So we leave that for here. In terms of the advantages and the disadvantages, okay, so advantages, customers can see, touch, taste, try out products, a little bit like I was talking before, like I like to do, particularly with bigger purchases. You have staff interacting with customers, so that allows customer relationships to be built and to develop and to grow. And also you can make use of displays either in windows or in the store to attract customers and who then make purchases based off of those displays as well, which again, if you think you're not operating a physical store, these are all things that you kind of miss out on. Disadvantages can be expensive to set up and operate. You think you've got rent to pay, you've got bills to pay associated with running premises, all that sort of thing. So there can be some pretty significant costs. And again, we look at costs in a bit more detail when we look at business locations, because they will definitely vary depending on where you locate your business. Lots of government regulations you have to comply with in terms of your premises. A lot of these are local government regulations, which you might not even think about before you start looking into planning a business. But even things like signage and what you can do directly outside of your premises, that sort of thing, even renovations you can make, lots of regulations that you'll need to make sure you comply with. You have considerations such as access to parking or transport links you need to think about when you are looking at a physical premises. And your customer reach is limited to the locality of the store. So again, this is why, clicks and mortar has become a thing, because if you are just going to operate a retailer with no website, you really, really are limiting your customer reach just to those people who are willing and able to physically come to your store. All right, the fourth one was the franchise model. So franchise is a word you will be familiar with, I'm sure, but at this stage, the kind of extent of your understanding of what that actually means might be somewhat limited. Look, we don't need to go into too much detail here, but basically a franchise is where one business licenses another person with the right to operate under their name, sell their products and services, and use their operating systems. So the franchisee, the person that's buying the franchise, pays an upfront fee to the franchisor, and then an ongoing percentage of profits in return for the right to operate under their name, sell their products and services, so on and so forth. So a franchise agreement is put in place, and that details the rights and responsibilities of both parties. Okay, so lots and lots of the well-known brands that we're familiar with here in Australia operate this type of business model. The ones that we see here are just a few of them. The advantages of operating a franchise, and this is, I guess, from the franchisees, the franchisee's point of view, the person that's buying the franchise. It means if you're thinking of starting up a business, you can buy into a business with a strong reputation and brand so that you kind of hit the ground running. Okay, you have kind of instant sales because people are buying. It's not just about your location, your own business. It's about the vision of the brand and the reputation of the brand as a whole. So this is a way to kind of generate sales very, very quickly. Also, reduce risk of business failure. Again, that's really because of the above. Like if you buy into the right franchise, like famously back in the UK, like when I was working for McDonald's 25 odd years ago, at that point there were 2,000 McDonald's restaurants. Now they were not French. There was very few franchises that were actually owned by the company, but the reality was that opened close to 2,000 restaurants by the time I was working for them, and not one had ever closed down. Okay, this was a very successful business. So if there's a reduced risk of your business failing if you're going to buy into a already successful franchise. Great support and advice available from the franchisor because they also want your business to succeed. Obviously, the franchisor is selling franchises. They want all of those franchises to succeed because it makes their own business grow as well. So they're going to be a really good source of support and advice in the running of your business. And that's part of the franchise agreement anyway. That's what they're there to do. And systems and processes are already in place. I mean, that links into the first bullet point there. You hit the ground running. Everything's kind of set in place for you. You don't have to think about a lot of the things that if you were starting another business from scratch, because it's already there. The processes are there. You just start operating in the way that they operate. Disadvantages. The main one is that it can be very, very expensive to buy a franchise initially. And then, of course, you're paying this ongoing fee, this ongoing percentage of your profits. In terms of buying into a franchise, like to buy a McDonald's in a prime location, you're talking the millions and millions of dollars. So, and again, it's all relative to the franchise that you're buying and location of it. But it can be very, very expensive to get into this. Also, as a franchisee, because you have this franchise agreement and you're operating under the franchisor's systems and selling their stuff, you have limited control over many aspects of your business because all of that stuff is in place. Like you have like an operations manual, which you'll be provided with, and you really have to stick to that operations manual, which is why if you go into any McDonald's, it really is the same business because they have to operate under the same systems, but have the same systems in place and selling the same products as all the other ones because the McDonald's franchise agreement is very, very tight. And that will be the same with all of those examples that I just gave you before. Another issue you have here is that your business can be negatively impacted by other operators of the same brand. So this is one reason that the franchisors are so tight with their franchise agreements and allow very little freedom and flexibility for franchisees because they want to make sure that the business does well and puts a positive spin on that brand. So if the McDonald's down the road does something wrong and there's an issue which causes some drama in the community, that can obviously impact other McDonald's. So while that is an issue, the franchise companies are very aware of this and they have a lot of stuff in place to actually minimize the risk of that happening. The importer model. So we're getting towards the end of our list. So importing, this basically means you buy your goods and services from overseas and then sell them in your home country. So we're here in Australia. That means bringing goods and services in from overseas and selling them within the Australian market. Now, globalization has been huge over the past year. Globalization, this concept that the world has kind of become a more connected, interconnected place. And this is largely through technology, but it's through the way that governments operate as well. It's, we operate now in a kind of a global economy, okay? So this has become an increasingly popular business model. Okay, so we're introduced to this concept of globalization in the first outcome under sources of business opportunity. So we're kind of reflecting back on that here. So this idea of got an increase in international trade, increase in travel, increase in communications between nations, reduction in trade barriers, developments in technology, all of these factors kind of feed into this idea that globalization is much more of a thing now than it was in the past. So many businesses exploit this to kind of operate across international borders. So look, all of the car brands that operate in Australia now basically have to operate the importer model, because as of about 2017, I think it was, Australia, we no longer manufacture cars. There are no car factories in Australia anymore. So any car retailing business in Australia now by default has basically become an importer model. So 500,000 cars per year were produced in Australia at the industry's peak, and that was by a number of brands. By the early 2000s, we only had 4 left, which was these 4 here, so Toyota, Ford, Holden, and Mitsubishi. Then by over the next few years, more and more of them disappeared. 2008, Mitsubishi disappeared, and then we were left with 3. 2017, these 3 were left, but then they all disappeared in 2017. And actually, there was quite a lot of manufacturing going around Melbourne as well at that time. But as of 2017, no longer manufacture cars in Australia. All of these brands that still sell here, and they all still sell here, are operating an importer model, okay? Advantages of our importer model. It gives access to products that the business's own country does not produce. Okay, that's fair enough. So it means we as Australians can access products that are not made here, such as now cars. It allows access to cheaper labour markets than ours here in Australia. So that also tends to lead on to lower prices of the ultimate good or service that involves that labour to make it. And also it provides access to seasonal products year round. So if you think we're only staying within Australia, we've got the seasons. It means if the seasons are flipped in the northern hemisphere, it means you can have access to, say, for example, fresh fruit and vegetables that are not going to be grown in Australia in particular seasons. You can bring them in, so we have access to this stuff year round. Disadvantages. If you're doing this, it means local employment is reduced, because we're producing stuff overseas, we're accessing stuff overseas rather than making it here in Australia. That has social responsibility and business reputation issues. Look, at the end of the day, it's kind of the way the world is going. It's the way things have moved. So I would say that the impact of that is probably less now than it once was, but you still need to think about the social responsibility if you have the option of making something in Australia as opposed to getting it made, for example, up in Asia and then bringing it back down to Australia. There is also the need, though, to be dealing with different economic and legal systems than our own, which can increase the complexity of doing business. If you've got suppliers or you're buying stuff from, countries in Asia, you need to be familiar with the economic systems and legal systems up there as well to make sure you're not falling foul of any rules, regulations and laws in those countries. So it just puts a layer of extra complexity on things which you would not have if you were not otherwise doing that. And increased costs of delivery and potentially longer wait times because the things have to come from a larger distance effectively. And then finally, our exporter model. So this is the flip of importing. So this is where the exporter produces goods and services in Australia and then sells them to overseas buyers. Again, just like with importing, due to globalization, there's been a big increase in this. Australia's main exports, natural resources, are huge. Australia has a lot of natural resources in the ground. So iron ore, coal, gas, gold, grain, meat, that sort of thing. We're also actually really, really strong in education as a supplier. So this is information from a couple of years ago. Foreign students are our fourth largest export, even with the pandemic, which was surprising because obviously a lot of them couldn't come over here. But yeah, exporting. So what we're talking about here is universities predominantly having a huge number of overseas students. That is an export because we're selling an Australian service to foreign people, even though those foreign people are potentially here, but actually the uni campuses also operate campuses in other nations as well. So it's kind of a mixture of both. But yeah, that counts as an export because we're selling Australian services to international markets, even though some of those people are physically here in Australia. Just a bit of information backing this up. So this is the figures for education. So this is 2016 to 2017. So the figures are kind of old, but you can see the kind of figures we're talking about. This is so in Victoria, $9,089 million in that 1 year period, which is the revenue generated from foreign countries through our education. So it's talking about a lot of money here. Advantages of doing this allows Australian business to increase sales by accessing other markets. Like the Australian market, we only have a population of somewhere between 25, 26 million. That's pretty small on a global scale. If you're just going to stick to selling to Australians in Australia, you're kind of limiting things. If you now open up your potential market to the US, to Europe, to Asia, that's a huge market, a huge potential market to kind of tap into. So it means you can increase your sales by accessing those other markets. There is also the opportunity to potentially expand the life cycle of mature products. Now, best way to give you explain what that means is to give you an example. So Apple, for example, obviously Apple every year every September they come out with their new iPhone. Okay, so September this year, the iPhone 15 series was released. Next September will be the 16 and then so on and so forth, which does mean that models like the iPhone 11, 12, and some of those models are now a few years old. There really isn't a market for them in Australia, but developing countries, there still is because they're a little cheaper. So what Apple do, those products that are not selling in the developed world, they can focus on those slightly older models in the developing nations. So it expands the life cycle of those products. This means they can still sell them for many years longer than they would if they were just selling within developed nations like Australia. Another thing, it promotes Australian business overseas, which is a good thing to do in terms of, all countries are kind of competing economically. So anything that's promoting Australia overseas is a good thing. Disadvantages of doing this, again, complexity of dealing with things overseas. You're now going to be managing more remote relationships. You've got language differences, time differences to take into account. And to be honest, this would also potentially be relevant for the importer as well. Again, this understanding of other cultures, other legal systems we mentioned similarly in the importer model and similarly to the importer. Think about this. A lot of the similarities, a lot of the advantages, disadvantages are going to apply to both of these models. Again, high transport costs. If you're just selling domestically, it's going to cost you a certain amount to ship your products. But if you're now selling overseas, particularly a long way overseas, then you're going to have to incur those costs as well. Okay, so just to finish up, so we looked at the 6 different business models. Again, just re-emphasize at this point, this idea that businesses tend to not operate just one type of business model. There's multiple involved. And just as some examples here, if you think Apple, of the 6 we looked at, the only one that they do not operate is franchise. Okay, but they operate those 5 green types of business model there. Similarly, Good Guys, okay, they operate those 4 green ones. They operate those. Now, in terms of exports, I'm not sure. Maybe they do. I'm not sure if they sell to overseas. Maybe they do by now. I'm not sure. But certainly at least the 4 green ones that you see there, and so on and so forth. So that's our 6 types of business model. Remember, we had 6 types of business structure. Do not confuse. If you ask questions about business structure, don't start talking about this stuff, and flip that around as well. If you're asked about business models, don't start talking about partnerships and sole traders and that sort of thing. Make sure you compartmentalize all this content into the right places. But that's it for Key Knowledge 3. I will see you in the next video for Key Knowledge 4. Cheers for now.